The air was thick with an uneasy silence as Jake and his friends, Sarah and Tom, parked their car outside the dilapidated structure known as the Old Pine Asylum. Tales of the asylum's dark past had long circulated among the locals. It was said to be haunted by the spirits of patients who suffered in its walls, their cries echoing through the halls long after its doors had been sealed. Intrigued by these stories, the trio decided to spend a night exploring the abandoned building, armed with nothing but flashlights, a camera, and an insatiable curiosity. As they approached the entrance, the rusted gate creaked ominously, and a chill ran down Jake's spine. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows that danced across the cracked pavement, as if warning them to turn back. Inside, the asylum was a maze of crumbling walls and shattered windows, each room telling a story of its own. They ventured deeper, the air growing colder and heavier with every step. Sarah's laughter echoed through the halls as she attempted to lighten the mood, but the laughter felt forced, echoing hollowly in the vast emptiness. Tom, always the skeptic, mocked the ghost stories, claiming they were just that, stories. As they reached the first patient room, the door creaked open as if inviting them in. The remnants of the past lay scattered about a rusty bed frame, yellowed pages of medical records fluttering in the draft, and haunting photographs of patients that seemed to watch them. With each flash of their cameras, the feeling of unease grew, as if they were not alone in this forsaken place. They pressed on, drawn deeper into the asylum's bowels. The further they went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. A sudden noise echoed from the end of the corridor, a loud crash, followed by silence. Heart rates quickened as Jake suggested they investigate. They turned off their flashlights, and in the darkness, the fear became palpable, each breath sounding like a shout in the silence. As they cautiously approached the source of the noise, they stumbled upon a room filled with broken furniture and shattered glass. But what caught their attention was a large, rusted wheelchair in the center of the room, facing the corner. It was as if someone or something had been waiting there. A sense of dread washed over them as they felt the air grow heavier, the silence thicker. Tom, still trying to rationalize everything, stepped closer to inspect the wheelchair. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted, and an unexplainable dread seeped into their bones. The flashlight beams flickered and dimmed, as if the darkness itself was swallowing their light. Just then, a guttural whisper, barely audible, slithered through the air, sending chills down their spines. "Get out," it hissed, and the trio froze, exchanging terrified glances. The sense of safety they had felt moments before vanished entirely. A panic surged through them, and they turned to flee, but as they did, the door slammed shut, trapping them in the room. They pounded on the door, screaming for help that would never come. In a desperate attempt to escape, they searched for another way out. Tom found a small window at the back of the room. With the weight of fear pushing them forward, they tried to pry it open. Just then, Sarah, who had been standing near the wheelchair, gasped, her face going pale. "Guys, look," she whispered, pointing at the wall. There, scrawled in what appeared to be blood, were desperate messages: "Leave while you can, and they are watching." A sense of impending doom enveloped them as they realized the truth: they were not alone, and whatever lingered in this forsaken place was aware of their presence. Finally, the window creaked open, but the darkness outside was a terrifying abyss. Without thinking, they climbed out, desperately hoping to escape the horrors within. As they landed on the overgrown grass, the silence of the night was shattered by a loud bang from inside the asylum, echoing through the air. They sprinted towards the car, hearts racing, only to find the area surrounding it transformed. The shadows shifted ominously, and they could have sworn they heard distant laughter echoing in the wind. Frantically, they tried to unlock the doors, but their hands trembled so violently that the keys slipped through their fingers, clattering to the ground. Fear gripped them as they heard a faint whisper behind them, sending chills down their spines. "You shouldn't have come here," the trio turned, but the night was empty, the darkness concealing whatever horror lurked just beyond the reach of their flashlights. With a surge of adrenaline, they finally managed to unlock the car and jumped inside, locking the doors behind them. They fumbled with the ignition, their breaths coming in quick gasps as they tried to gather their composure. Just as Jake turned the key, the lights flickered, revealing a figure standing at the entrance of the asylum, pale, gaunt, and shrouded in shadow. As the engine roared to life, they could see the figure clearly, and what they saw sent waves of terror coursing through their bodies. It was a woman in a tattered hospital gown, her eyes sunken and void of life, her mouth twisted into a haunting grin. She pointed a bony finger towards them, and a bone-chilling scream escaped her lips. The sound pierced through the air, echoing in the darkness, as if calling forth the spirits of the asylum. Jake slammed his foot on the accelerator, and they sped away, the haunting scream fading into the distance. But as they drove, the shadows seemed to chase them, lingering just beyond the edge of the headlights, as if the asylum itself was unwilling to let them go. Hours later, they finally reached the safety of a well-lit diner, shaking from their encounter. Over greasy plates of food, they tried to rationalize what they had experienced. Tom insisted it was just their imaginations running wild, fueled by fear. But Sarah and Jake knew better. They couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them. That night, as they returned home, sleep was elusive. They each lay in bed, haunted by the image of the woman in the gown, her scream echoing in their minds. Days passed, and life returned to normal, but the memories of the asylum lingered like a dark cloud, casting shadows over their everyday existence. One night, weeks after their encounter, Jake awoke to a strange noise echoing through his house. A rhythmic scratching at his window made his heart race. He sat up, glancing at the clock. It was 3 a.m. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, and he knew he had to check. As he approached the window, he hesitated, recalling the events at the asylum. He pulled back the curtain slowly, and to his horror, there stood the woman from the asylum, her eyes wide and vacant, her grin stretching unnaturally across her face. He stumbled back, heart pounding in his chest, but it was too late. She had seen him. Panicking, he turned to run, but the air grew thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. He felt a cold presence wrapping around him, paralyzing him in place. He could hear her voice, a chilling whisper that echoed in his mind, "You can't escape." Just then, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a message from Tom. "I think they're coming for us." The panic in Tom's text made Jake's blood run cold. He quickly typed back, "What do you mean?" But before he could hit send, the lights flickered, and the room grew darker. The shadows in the corners seemed to pulse and shift, closing in around him. In a desperate attempt to escape, Jake dashed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if an invisible force held it shut. He turned back to the window, but the woman was gone. Instead, the room was filled with faint whispers, echoes of the asylum's tortured souls, each one begging for release. "Get out. Leave. Save yourself." The cacophony grew louder, drowning out his thoughts. Jake felt tears streaming down his face as he banged on the door, screaming for help, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness. It was a nightmare come to life, and he was trapped in a waking hell. Meanwhile, Tom and Sarah had their own terrifying encounters. Tom was in his living room, watching TV, when he felt a chill sweep through the room. The screen flickered, and suddenly, the images morphed into the interior of the asylum. He recognized the room with the rusted wheelchair, and a feeling of dread washed over him. Just then, a shadow crossed the screen, and the woman appeared, her hollow eyes locking onto him through the screen. "Help me," she whispered, and he felt a pull, a desperate urge to reach out to her, to save her. But deep down, he knew better. This was no plea for help, but a trap. In a panic, Tom leaped up and ran out of the house, the whispers following him, filling his ears with promises of darkness. He rushed to Sarah's place, hoping they could figure this out together. When he arrived, he found her trembling, clutching her phone. "Did you see her?" she asked, eyes wide with fear. "She's been appearing in my dreams, begging for help." They both knew they had to confront whatever haunted them, but fear gripped their hearts. They decided to return to the asylum, hoping to end the nightmare that invaded their lives. When they arrived at the asylum, the building loomed over them, a dark monolith of despair. As they stepped inside, the familiar chill seeped into their bones. They ventured deeper, following the path they had taken weeks ago. This time, the air was electric with tension, each creak of the floorboards amplifying their anxiety. As they entered the room with the wheelchair, they found it empty, the atmosphere thick with an unsettling stillness. They felt the walls closing in, and just when they thought they might be alone, the door slammed shut behind them. In the suffocating darkness, a voice echoed, "You shouldn't have come back." They turned to find Jake standing in the corner, pale and trembling. "I can't escape," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She's everywhere. The realization struck them this was no longer just a haunted asylum. It was a living entity, feeding on their fears and tormenting them with the memories of its past. Together they huddled, sharing their experiences, and the shadows in the room began to shift, forming dark shapes that seemed to whisper their names. With a surge of courage, they decided to confront the darkness that had ensnared them. They gathered their flashlights and aimed them at the shadows, illuminating the walls with beams of light. As they did, the shadows writhed and recoiled, revealing grotesque faces of the asylum's tortured souls. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of anguish pleading for release. The trio felt their hearts race, but they pressed on, determined to break the curse that bound them. Jake, in a moment of clarity, stepped forward, raising his voice above the noise. "We're here to help you," he shouted, channeling all his fear into a desperate plea. The shadows paused, their movements faltering, as if considering his words. "You're not alone anymore," Sarah added, her voice trembling but resolute. "We can end this together." Tom, feeling emboldened, joined in. "We'll find a way to help you. We won't leave you behind." The shadows began to dissipate, the air growing lighter as the tortured souls seemed to gather around them, forming a circle of light. In that moment, the woman appeared before them, her eyes filled with sorrow and desperation. "Help us," she whispered, her voice echoing through the room. "Free us from this pain." The trio reached out, their hands joined, and focused on the light that radiated from within them. They envisioned breaking the chains that bound the spirits to the asylum, pushing against the darkness with their collective will. The shadows writhed and screamed, the cries of anguish morphing into a symphony of release as the spirits began to ascend. As the last of the shadows faded away, a wave of warmth washed over the room, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The woman smiled for the first time, her form becoming ethereal as she slowly dissipated into a cloud of shimmering light. They stood there, breathless and exhausted, but a profound sense of peace enveloped them. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the memories of their experience lingered. They left the asylum together, vowing never to return, but carrying with them the knowledge that light can triumph over darkness. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly returned to normal for Jake, Tom, and Sarah. They often reflected on their harrowing experience, but the haunting memories gradually faded. Yet sometimes, late at night, they could hear the faint whispers of the asylum echoing in their minds, reminding them of the darkness they had confronted. In the end, they learned a valuable lesson: some places are best left undisturbed, but when faced with fear, the strength of friendship and courage can illuminate even the darkest corners of despair.